It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of day where everything felt routine, almost predictable. I was in our shared bedroom, sifting through drawers in search of a flash drive I needed for an important work presentation. When it wasn't in the usual spot, I started checking the lower drawers, then moved to her vanity, rummaging through the tiny compartments crammed with her makeup and little trinkets. Still no luck. Frustrated, I turned to the trash bin next to her nightstand. That's when I saw them, 6 used condoms. I froze, my body rigid as my eyes locked on the damning evidence. My hands trembled as I dragged the bin closer, unable to tear my gaze away. Those used condoms stared back at me, as if mocking everything I thought I knew about my wife, Sophia. A cold wave of disbelief washed over me, and I could feel my stomach churning, bile rising as my mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Questions flooded my head. Who? When? Why? The air seemed heavier, suffocating, as my thoughts spiraled out of control. Sophia and I had been married for 8 years. Like any couple, we'd had our fair share of ups and downs, but never in my worst nightmares did I think I'd come across something so revolting, so degrading. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, staring at the trash bin as though it held some cursed object. My mind raced, rewinding through the past few months, trying to pinpoint signs I might have missed. Looking back, her behavior had been off. She'd been staying out late more often, claiming work dinners or vague meetings as excuses. She'd become secretive about her phone, and whenever I tried to connect with her, she brushed me off. But I dismissed it all, chalking it up to stress or my own paranoia. Now, it was impossible to ignore. A part of me, the rational part, urged patience. It told me to step back, collect my thoughts, and figure this out calmly. But my emotions overwhelmed any shred of logic. Anger, humiliation, and disbelief all crashed over me at once. I grabbed my phone, furiously scrolling through her texts and photos, desperately hoping to find some explanation, anything to make this feel less surreal. But there was nothing. No suspicious messages. No incriminating photos. It was as though she'd erased every trace. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Sophia. I yelled, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. She appeared in the doorway moments later, her expression calm, too calm. Her blonde hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and she held her phone loosely in one hand. She looked at me like I was some child throwing a fit over nothing. "What is it, Alex?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her tone as casual as ever. There was no room for pleasantries. My hand shook as I grabbed the trash bin and held it up for her to see. "Do you want to explain this?" Her eyes darted to the condoms for just a second before she shrugged. Shrugged. As if this was nothing. "What about it?" she said, her voice as nonchalant as if we were discussing groceries. "What about it?" I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. 6 used condoms in our bedroom trash, Sophia. Are you really going to act like this is normal? What happened next felt like a slap across the face. She smirked, actually smirked, and said, "Oh, Alex, don't blow this out of proportion. It's not a big deal. I still love only you." Her words hit me like a freight train, shattering whatever composure I had left. My world felt like it was crumbling as she continued, her voice dripping with a kind of detached cruelty I'd never seen before. "In fact," she added with a sly grin, "you could join us sometime if you're feeling adventurous." Join them. Her audacity left me speechless. The room spun as my vision blurred with a red haze. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my life. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a low, guttural growl. "Who is he?" Sophia rolled her eyes, like I'd just asked her some trivial question about the weather. "Relax, Alex. It's not that serious. Not that serious. 6 used condoms. In our bedroom. Not. That. Serious. I couldn't think straight. My fists clenched tightly, and for one brief, terrifying moment, I thought about punching a hole in the wall. Instead of lashing out, I grabbed her phone. She didn't even flinch. Arms crossed, she just stood there, watching with an air of indifference as I scrolled through her call logs and messages. Then, I found it, a video saved under an unfamiliar file name. My heart pounded as I tapped on it, my stomach twisting in dread. The screen lit up, and there she was, my wife, Sophia, entangled with some guy I didn't recognize. In our bed. In our home. In my life. Her laughter echoed in the background, sharp and cruel, as my body went numb. I wanted to smash the phone, to obliterate the evidence, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. When the video ended, I turned to her, my voice unnervingly calm. You've been cheating on me. In our bed. In our home. And you expect me to just, relax? Sophia shrugged, completely unfazed. Like I said, it's not a big deal. It doesn't change how I feel about you. That was it. Something inside me shattered. Her words, cold, detached, echoed in my mind like a twisted mantra. It doesn't change how I feel about you. How could someone be so heartless, so detached from the devastation they'd caused? Her indifference lit a fire in me I didn't even know existed. Not a big deal. I repeated, my voice eerily steady, even to my own ears. You think destroying our marriage, humiliating me in my own home, is no big deal? She rolled her eyes, irritation flickering in her voice. God, Alex, why are you so dramatic? It's just, physical. You know how things get boring after a while. She waved her hand like she was dismissing a bad haircut, not the betrayal of everything we'd built together. My hands curled into tight fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I forced myself to stay focused on her face, calm, unbothered, even smug. What's his name? I demanded, taking a step closer. Why does it matter? She replied, her tone thick with disdain. It's not like you know him. Try me, I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. She let out a heavy sigh, like I was the one inconveniencing her. Fine. His name is Ethan. Ethan. The name seared into my mind like a red-hot brand. I wanted to find him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain ripping through me like jagged glass. Where did you meet him? I pressed. For a moment, her composure faltered, just a crack in the mask. At work. And that's when everything clicked. Ethan, the new sales rep she'd casually mentioned months ago. The one she insisted was just a coworker, whenever his name came up in conversation. My stomach churned with a sickening realization. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice tight with restraint. She gave me a look of irritation mixed with pity, like I was a clueless child asking too many questions. Does it really matter, Alex? You're just torturing yourself. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a sharp, dangerous whisper. How long? She shrugged, her indifference firmly back in place. A few months. A few months. All that time, she'd been coming home to me, kissing me, lying next to me in the same bed where she'd been with someone else. The weight of it threatened to crush me, but I wasn't done. Do you even feel guilty? I asked, my voice barely audible. Sophia stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering her answer. Then she smiled, a small, cruel smile that sent a chill through my entire body. Not really. You're just, boring, Alex. Predictable. Always stuck in your routines. I needed something exciting. Her words hit harder than any physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I'd always prided myself on being a good husband, steady, dependable, reliable. Now, she was throwing that back at me as if it were some kind of flaw. And you didn't think to talk to me? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. To tell me you were unhappy. What would have been the point, she snapped. You wouldn't have changed. You can't even handle this conversation without falling apart. That was the final straw. I couldn't take another second of her smug, dismissive attitude. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording. What are you doing? She asked, her calm exterior slipping for the first time. I'm getting this on record, I said, my voice sharp and unyielding. So when I file for divorce, the court knows exactly who you are and what you've done. Sophia's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine anger cross her face. Don't be ridiculous, Alex. You're not going to divorce me. You don't have the guts. Watch me, I snapped, my fingers moving swiftly over my phone screen as I sent the video of her confession to my email. Her confidence wavered, her smug expression faltering. Okay, you're taking this way too far. You don't need to ruin everything over one mistake. One mistake. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound cutting through the tension in the room. This wasn't a mistake, Sophia. It was a choice. Again and again, you chose to betray me, to disrespect me, to bring him into our home. And now you expect me to just, what? Pretend it didn't happen. Forgive you. She crossed her arms, her lips curling into a sneer. Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. Her words hit like a slap across the face, but instead of breaking, I felt something shift inside me, a steely resolve I didn't know I had. You know what? I said, my voice calm and steady. I've had enough. Pack your things and get out. Her eyes widened in shock, clearly not expecting my response. Excuse me. You heard me, I replied firmly. I want you out of my house. Tonight. For the first time, Sophia seemed genuinely taken aback. You can't just throw me out. This is my home too. Not anymore, I said coldly. You made your choice, Sophia. Now you get to live with it. Her bravado faltered for a brief moment before she recovered, her face twisting into a mask of anger. Fine, she spat. But don't think for a second you're coming out of this unscathed. I'll make sure everyone knows what a controlling, boring loser you are. Do whatever you want, I replied, my tone calm and detached. You've already shown the world exactly who you are. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, leaving behind a strange, hollow silence. I stood there, still clutching my phone, my mind racing with adrenaline and rage. But beneath the anger, there was a gnawing emptiness. This wasn't just the end of an argument, it felt like the end of my entire life as I knew it. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. Every inch of it felt poisoned, the bed, the dresser, even the photos on the walls seemed to mock me. Grabbing my car keys, I walked out of the house, desperate for air, for space, for anything but the suffocating quiet that had settled there. I drove aimlessly through the darkened streets, the world outside a blur of headlights and shadow. Eventually, I found myself in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. The flickering neon sign cast a pale blue glow across the cracked asphalt, and the scent of burnt coffee and fried food hit me as soon as I stepped inside. It was oddly comforting, a small slice of normalcy in the chaos my life had become. I slid into a booth by the window, staring blankly at the menu. My thoughts swirled around Sophia, her words, her smug smile, the way she'd so casually dismantled everything we'd built together. Can I get you something, hon? The waitress asked, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. Coffee, I muttered. As she walked away, my eyes drifted to the counter. A man sat there, hunched over a plate of pancakes, laughing and chatting with the waitress. He looked familiar. Too familiar. And then it hit me like a freight train. It was him. Ethan. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. What were the odds? Fate, luck, or some cruel joke of the universe, I didn't know. My mind raced with possibilities. Should I confront him? Follow him? Or just sit there, stewing in my rage? But as I watched him laugh, utterly oblivious to the destruction he'd caused, something inside me snapped. I got up and walked to the counter. At first, he didn't even notice me, too busy flirting with the waitress. But when I cleared my throat, his head turned, and his expression froze. "Ethan, right?" I said, my voice calm but laced with ice. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. Yeah. Do I know you?" "You should," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, steady tone. "I'm Alex. Sophia's husband." His face went pale, and for a moment, I thought he might make a run for it. But he quickly masked his panic with a fake, overly confident smile. "Hey, man, look, I didn't know she was married." "She told me." "Save it," I interrupted, raising a hand to cut him off. "I'm not here for your excuses. I just wanted to see the guy who thought it was a great idea to screw another man's wife." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the diner like he was searching for an escape route. "Look, I don't want any trouble, okay? It's over. Whatever was going on with her, I'm done." "Over?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "You think this just ends because you're done? You've been screwing my wife, in my bed, for months, and now you want to play innocent? You want to act like you're the victim here?" His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought he might say something. But instead, he stood up, fumbling to throw a few bills on the counter. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered, his voice low. "I didn't know. If I had, I never would've." "Don't," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut him off mid-sentence. "Just don't. You knew enough. And trust me, this isn't over." He froze, his hand on the door handle. For a brief moment, I thought he might argue, but then he seemed to think better of it. Without another word, he pushed the door open and walked out, letting it slam shut behind him. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. The waitress was watching me from across the diner, her wide eyes betraying her uncertainty about whether to step in or call the cops. Forcing myself to take a deep breath, I nodded in her direction before walking back to my booth. The coffee was cold by the time I finally took a sip, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. When I got home, the house was dark, and Sophia's car was gone. For a brief moment, I felt relief, a flicker of hope that she'd actually left. But as I stepped into the living room, that hope was snuffed out. Her suitcase sat by the door, untouched. She hadn't left. She was waiting. Sophia was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. When she noticed me, she raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into that infuriating smirk. "Back so soon?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I saw him," I said, ignoring her question. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Who?" "Ethan," I said flatly. "At the diner." She didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she smirked again. "And? Did you two bond over how awful I am?" I stared at her, my anger simmering just below the surface. "You're unbelievable, you know that. And you're predictable," she shot back without missing a beat. "What did you think, Alex? That confronting him would change anything? He's just a guy. You're the one I married. You're the one who's supposed to keep me interested." Her words stung, each one landing like a blow, but this time, I didn't let her see it. Instead, I nodded slowly, keeping my face calm. "You're right," I said, my voice even. "I am predictable. And that's why you didn't see this coming." Her smirk faltered, just slightly, as I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit play. The video of her and Ethan filled the room, the sound of her laughter echoing back at her like a ghost from the grave. Her face went pale, all traces of smugness draining away. For the first time that night, I saw something that looked like genuine fear in her eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight, almost panicked. "Making sure you don't weasel your way out of this," I said coldly. "You're done, Sophia. You wanted excitement. Well, you've got it. But don't think for a second you're taking me down with you." Her expression morphed from confidence to outright panic as she watched the video play on. Her laughter, so carefree and mocking in the recording, now hung in the room like a curse. For once, she had no words. "Turn that off," she finally said, her voice shaky, betraying the fear she couldn't hide. "Why?" I asked, my voice as icy as the tension in the room. "You weren't shy when you were making it. What's wrong now? Can't face your own actions?" Sophia lunged for the phone, but I stepped back, holding it just out of her reach. "Don't even think about it," I warned, my tone firm. "You've had your fun, Sophia. Now it's my turn." Her eyes narrowed, and the fear that had been there moments before twisted into anger. "You're such a child, Alex. Playing games instead of having an adult conversation." "Games?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You're the one who turned our marriage into a game, Sophia. Sneaking around, lying, laughing behind my back while you betrayed me. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" She crossed her arms, her defiance back in full force. "What do you want, Alex? You want me to grovel? Cry? Beg you to take me back? Because that's not happening." "Good," I shot back. "Because that's not what I want. I want you gone. Out of my life, out of this house, out of everything." Her jaw tightened, and I could see the argument forming on her lips. But before she could speak, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside made both of us freeze. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice suddenly cautious. "No idea," I muttered, walking to the window. A sleek black SUV rolled into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark. My stomach knotted as the driver's door opened and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. He wasn't Ethan. This guy looked older, tougher, with a demeanor that radiated no-nonsense authority. "What the hell?" Sophia whispered, moving to stand just behind me. The man knocked on the door, the sound firm and deliberate. I glanced at Sophia, who for the first time that night, looked genuinely confused. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain in place. "Can I help you?" "Alex Carter," the man asked, his deep voice authoritative and calm. I hesitated. "Who's asking?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "Detective Monroe. Local police department." My heart sank. "What's this about?" "I need to speak with both of you," he said, his eyes flicking past me to Sophia. Sophia stepped forward, her expression a mix of curiosity and irritation. "What's going on? Can I come in?" Monroe asked. I nodded slowly, unhooking the chain and stepping aside. Monroe entered, his sharp gaze scanning the room. The tension between Sophia and me clearly wasn't lost on him. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, pulling out a small notebook. "We received a tip about some extracurricular activities happening at this address. Specifically, activities involving a certain Nathaniel Palmer." Sophia's face turned white. "What does that mean?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my mind was racing. Monroe raised an eyebrow. "Nathaniel Palmer is under investigation for a series of scams and fraudulent activities, including blackmail. He's been targeting married women, recording compromising material, and using it to extort them." My blood turned to ice. "You're saying he—" "Mr. Carter," Monroe interrupted, his tone firm. "Do you know if Mr. Palmer ever filmed anything private involving your wife?" I couldn't answer. My mind flashed to the video I'd found, the one Sophia had so carelessly saved on her phone. Was she part of this, or was she just another one of his victims? Sophia's voice finally broke through the storm in my head. I didn't know anything about that, she stammered, her voice trembling. Ethan never mentioned anything like that. He said he just wanted to have fun. Fun? I snapped, glaring at her. Is that what you call this? Monroe held up a hand, his voice calm but commanding. Let's stay focused. Mrs. Carter, if you have any videos or photos involving Mr. Palmer, I strongly advise you to hand them over now. It'll help us build a case against him. Sophia hesitated, her eyes darting toward me. I didn't wait. I grabbed her phone from the coffee table and handed it to Monroe. Check this, I said, my voice flat. There's a video saved under a random file name. It might be what you're looking for. Sophia gasped, reaching for the phone, but Monroe stepped back, tucking it safely into his jacket. Thank you, Mr. Carter, he said. This will be very helpful. Sophia's face flushed with fury as she turned on me, her eyes burning with rage. You had no right. Sophia spat, her voice sharp with fury. Enough, I snapped, cutting her off. You're lucky I didn't hand over everything else I know about you. Detective Monroe cleared his throat, drawing our attention. I'll need both of you to come down to the station tomorrow to give statements. In the meantime, I suggest you both take a long, hard look at the choices that brought you here. Without waiting for a response, he turned and left, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The moment the door shut, Sophia rounded on me. How dare you, she hissed, her anger bubbling over. How dare I? I shot back, my voice rising. You're the one who brought this into our lives, Sophia. You let that scumbag into our home, into our bed. And now, because of you, we're tangled up in a police investigation. Her face contorted with rage, but she didn't bother to deny any of it. Instead, she grabbed her suitcase, her movements jerky with frustration, and stormed toward the door. Where are you going? I demanded. Anywhere but here, she spat, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the walls. For the first time that night, the house was truly quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. I sank onto the couch, my body trembling as the weight of everything finally crashed over me. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned, not by a long shot. But maybe it was the ending I needed. I sat there in the stillness, thinking the worst was finally over. Sophia was gone, Detective Monroe had the damning video, and I could start piecing together what was left of my life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. There was something about the way Sophia's face had looked and Monroe mentioned blackmail. Something didn't add up. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat at the kitchen table, staring at her abandoned suitcase by the door. My mind raced, replaying every revelation from the night. Who was Sophia, really? Had she known about Ethan's schemes, or was she just another one of his victims? And if she had been in the dark about his blackmail, why hadn't she come clean about the affair when she had the chance? Curiosity gnawed at me, overriding the exhaustion threatening to pull me under. There had to be more hidden somewhere in her world. Monroe had taken her phone, but her laptop was still here, tucked away in her office. If she had secrets, that's where they would be. I hesitated, the beer cold and wet in my hand. A part of me felt like a scavenger, picking through the remains of our marriage. But after everything she'd done, did I owe her privacy? The answer came swiftly, no. What I owed was the truth, to myself. Sophia's office smelled faintly of her perfume, a scent that turned my stomach as I stepped inside. Her laptop sat on the desk, its screen glowing faintly in sleep mode. My heart pounded as I opened it. The password screen greeted me, but I knew Sophia better than she thought. I typed in her usual go-to combination, our wedding date followed by her initials. The screen unlocked without hesitation. Her desktop was a chaotic mess of icons, but one folder caught my eye: Work Docs, Private. The word private felt less like a warning and more like an invitation. I double-clicked it, and my stomach twisted into knots. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each labeled with a name: John, Mike, Paul, and more. My name wasn't among them. My hands trembled as I opened the first folder. It was a treasure trove of evidence: photos, videos, emails, all incriminating. It became glaringly clear: Sophia wasn't just having an affair with Ethan. She'd been involved with multiple men over the years. Each folder laid out her interactions in excruciating detail: dinner reservations, hotel receipts, explicit messages. It was all there, and it felt like I was drowning, each discovery dragging me deeper into the truth of who she really was. But then, as I continued, things took an even darker turn. I clicked on a folder labeled Ethan and found something unexpected: a spreadsheet. Names, dates, dollar amounts. At first, it didn't make sense, but as I scrolled through, the pieces fell into place. These were payments, money Sophia had received from these men. Sophia wasn't just cheating. She was running a scam, using these relationships to extort money from them. My hands went cold as the full weight of Sophia's betrayal settled over me. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. She was involved in something much bigger, and far darker. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the room tilt around me. My mind replayed every excuse, every argument, every late-night work dinner. How had I missed it all? How had I been so blind? The sharp ring of the doorbell jolted me out of my thoughts. My heart jumped into my throat. It was almost midnight. Who would be here at this hour? Slowly, I crept to the front door and peered through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, his face obscured by the dim light. He wasn't a cop, and he definitely wasn't Ethan. I cracked the door open just enough to speak. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my voice low but firm. "You're Alex, right?" the man asked, his tone equally quiet. I nodded, my grip tightening on the edge of the door. "I need to talk to you," he said. "About Sophia." Every instinct I had screamed at me to shut the door, but my curiosity got the better of me. Reluctantly, I let him in. He introduced himself as Lucas, one of the names I'd seen in Sophia's folders. His face was etched with exhaustion and anger. "She screwed me over," he said bluntly, his tone bitter. "And I'm guessing she did the same to you." "She's my wife," I replied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Lucas's eyes widened in disbelief. "Your wife?" He shook his head and let out a low whistle. "Man, I thought I had it bad, but you've been living with a snake." Then he laid it all out. Sophia had seduced him, gained his trust, and then started asking for loans under the guise of fabricated emergencies. When he stopped giving her money, she threatened to expose their affair to his family and his boss. He'd finally cut her off, but not before losing thousands of dollars. "She's dangerous," Lucas said grimly. "And if she's tied up with Ethan, you're in deeper than you think. That guy's bad news: fraud, blackmail, even whispers of violence." My head spun. Sophia wasn't just a liar or a cheater, she was a predator. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice hollow. Lucas's expression hardened. "I want her stopped. People like her don't quit unless someone makes them. And since you're married to her, you've got leverage. Take her down before she destroys someone else." I stared at him, my mind racing. Up until now, I'd thought Sophia's infidelity was the worst of it. But now I saw the true depth of her deceit, and the danger she posed to anyone in her path. For the first time, my anger shifted into something sharper: resolve. Sophia had made me feel powerless, but now I saw an opportunity to take back control. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice steady. Lucas nodded, his expression grim. Good luck. You're gonna need it. As he walked out into the night, I stood in the doorway, the cool air biting at my skin. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I was determined to bring Sophia down, not just for me, but for everyone she'd hurt. The next morning, I woke up with a grim sense of purpose. Everything Sophia had done, the lies, the manipulation, the destruction, was something I couldn't let slide. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd treated people like tools, using and discarding them without a second thought. Lucas's story had confirmed what I'd already suspected: Sophia was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. After brewing a pot of coffee, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming mug as I started formulating a plan. If I was going to stop her, I needed to be smart and strategic. Detective Monroe already had the video of her and Ethan, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed to expose everything: her scams, her lies, her entire web of deceit. The first step was calling Lucas. "I've been thinking," I said when he picked up. "If Sophia's blackmailing you, chances are she's doing it to others. Do you have any proof?" There was a long pause on the line before Lucas finally spoke. "Yeah," he said, his voice quieter this time. "Emails, texts, even a couple of recorded calls. She didn't know I was documenting everything." "Good," I said firmly. "Send it all to me. We're going to use it." By midday, my inbox was filled with damning evidence from Lucas: emails where Sophia promised to keep their affair secret in exchange for money, recordings of her veiled threats, and screenshots of financial transactions. It painted a clear picture of her deceit and manipulation. But I wasn't done. I called a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Laura, who came highly recommended by a friend. After I laid out the situation for her, she didn't sugarcoat it. "Your wife is committing fraud and extortion," Laura said bluntly. "You could go to the police with this, but if you want to protect yourself, and make sure she doesn't come after you during the divorce, you'll need leverage." "Leverage?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. "Get her to admit everything," Laura said. "On record. If you can do that, we can bury her, legally and financially." That afternoon, I set the trap. I texted Sophia, carefully crafting my words to get the response I wanted. "Me, we need to talk." Sophia, about what? Me, about what happens next. "I've been thinking, and maybe I overreacted." Sophia, really? You're finally seeing reason? I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to play the part. Me, yeah. Let's meet tonight and figure this out. I picked a neutral location, a quiet bar downtown where I knew the staff wouldn't pry. Arriving early, I slipped a discreet recording device into my pocket. My heart pounded as I waited, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. Sophia arrived 15 minutes late, her expression a mix of irritation and smug confidence. She was dressed to impress, as if she thought she could charm her way out of this. "You actually look good for once," she said as she slid into the booth across from me. I ignored the jab, keeping my tone calm. "I've been thinking about what you said. About how things got stale between us." Her lips curled into a satisfied smile. "So you're ready to admit your part in this?" I nodded, hating every second of the lie. "I've made mistakes, sure. But I also think we can fix this, if we're honest with each other." Her expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Honest, huh?" "Yes," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Let's put everything on the table. No more secrets. Tell me about Ethan. Tell me about the money." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might see through me. But then she let out a low, bitter laugh. "Ethan was fun," she said, swirling the straw in her drink. "He made me feel alive." "And the money?" I pressed, keeping my voice steady. She shrugged, her tone dismissive. "That was just survival, Alex. You think I could live the life I wanted on your salary?" Her words stung, but I stayed focused. So you've been supplementing our income? If you want to call it that, she said with a smirk. It's not like I hurt anyone. Those men knew what they were getting into. They wanted me, and I made them pay for the privilege. And the blackmail? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, her smirk slipping for the first time. That's a harsh word, don't you think? I prefer to call it an incentive to keep them quiet. I nodded, though my stomach churned. And how long have you been doing this? Does it matter? She snapped. Long enough to know what I'm doing. You're not the first to underestimate me, Alex. But if you play your cards right, we can still salvage this. You'd be surprised how forgiving people can be when there's money involved. Her casual cruelty was staggering, but I forced myself to keep my composure. So, you'd be willing to share the details? Maybe we can come up with a plan together. She raised an eyebrow. A plan for what? To make sure no one else finds out, I said carefully. If this got out, it could ruin both of us. Her sly smile returned, confident and full of self-assurance. Now you're thinking like a partner. I leaned back, letting her words sink in. I had everything I needed. When I got home, I wasted no time sending the recording to Laura and Detective Monroe. Sophia's arrogance had handed me exactly what I needed, a full, undeniable confession. By the time I went to bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks, a sense of control. Sophia had underestimated me, but now the tables had turned. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with a cold, calculated focus. I forwarded all the recordings and evidence to Laura, who called me almost immediately. This is airtight, she said, her tone sharp and confident. The confession, the blackmail records, this is enough to sink her in both criminal and civil court. But there's one problem. What's that? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. She's slippery. If she suspects what's coming, she'll bolt or try to destroy evidence. We need to act fast. Her words confirmed what I already knew, Sophia wasn't going down without a fight. But I had no intention of giving her the upper hand. What do you suggest? I asked. Let's hit her with everything at once, Laura replied without hesitation. We'll file for divorce, report her to the authorities for fraud and extortion, and freeze her assets. She won't see it coming. It was a ruthless plan, but Sophia had earned no mercy. Do it, I said, my voice firm. By the afternoon, the gears were already in motion. Laura had filed all the necessary paperwork, and Detective Monroe had issued a subpoena for Sophia's financial records. Meanwhile, I stayed at home, bracing for the inevitable blowback. Sophia stormed in just after 6 p.m., her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her face was a mask of fury, and she clutched her phone in one hand like a weapon. What the hell is this? She demanded, shoving the screen in my face. It was an email from Laura, notifying her of the divorce filing and the freezing of our joint accounts. This is what happens when you underestimate me, I said, leaning back in my chair. Her eyes narrowed, her usual smugness replaced by raw, seething anger. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think this is going to scare me? It's not about scaring you, I replied evenly. It's about ending this nightmare. You've hurt too many people, Sophia. It stops now. She laughed bitterly, pacing the room like a caged animal. You're pathetic, Alex. You think you're some kind of hero? All you've done is ruin yourself. Do you really think you can win against me? I don't need to win, I said, my voice steady. I just need the truth to come out. Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or just pure rage. You have no idea what you've started, she hissed. I'll make you regret this. The next morning, everything escalated. I woke to a barrage of calls and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails and messages poured in, filled with anger and accusations from some of the men Sophia had scammed. "You set me up, you bastard," one voicemail snarled. "Do you know what this is doing to my family?" It didn't take long to figure out what was happening. Sophia was spinning her web of lies, blaming me to deflect attention from herself. But she had underestimated me yet again. Laura had warned me this might happen and advised me to prepare for a smear campaign. I spent the day meticulously documenting everything, every message, every call, every attempt she made to discredit me. By the evening, I had enough evidence to further solidify my case against her. But Sophia wasn't finished yet. At 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. When I got home, I didn't waste a moment. I sent the recording to Laura and Detective Monroe. Sophia's arrogance had handed me exactly what I needed, a full confession. For the first time in weeks, as I lay in bed that night, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't in a long time: control. Sophia had underestimated me, but now the balance had shifted. The storm wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I started with a cold, calculated focus. I forwarded all the recordings and evidence to Laura, and she responded almost immediately with a call. "This is airtight," Laura said, her tone sharp and assured. "The confession, the blackmail records, this is enough to sink her in both criminal and civil court. But we've got a problem." "What's that?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "She's slippery. If she gets wind of this, she'll either bolt or destroy evidence. We have to act fast." Her words confirmed what I already knew: Sophia wouldn't go down without a fight. But I wasn't about to give her the upper hand. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Let's hit her with everything at once," Laura said decisively. "We'll file for divorce, report her to the authorities for fraud and extortion, and freeze her assets. She won't see it coming." It was a ruthless plan, but Sophia deserved every bit of it. "Do it," I said, my voice firm. By the afternoon, the wheels were already turning. Laura had filed the divorce paperwork, and Detective Monroe had issued a subpoena for Sophia's financial records. Meanwhile, I stayed home, bracing myself for the fallout. Sophia stormed in just after 6 p.m., her heels clicking against the floor like gunfire. Her face was a mask of fury, and she gripped her phone like a weapon. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, shoving the screen in my face. It was an email from Laura, notifying her of the divorce filing and the freezing of our joint accounts. "This is what happens when you underestimate me," I said, leaning back in my chair. Her eyes narrowed, her usual smugness replaced with raw anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think this is going to scare me?" "It's not about scaring you," I replied calmly. "It's about ending this nightmare. You've hurt too many people, Sophia. It stops now." She laughed bitterly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You're pathetic, Alex. You think you're some kind of hero? All you've done is ruin yourself. Do you really think you can win against me?" "I don't need to win," I said, my voice steady. "I just need the truth to come out." Her eyes flashed with something unreadable: fear, maybe, or just unrestrained rage. "You have no idea what you've started," she hissed. "I'll make you regret this." The next morning, things escalated. I woke to a flood of calls and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Angry messages poured in, each one more hostile than the last. "You set me up, you bastard," one voicemail snarled. "Do you know what this is doing to my family?" It didn't take long to realize what had happened. Sophia had gone on the offensive, spinning her own lies to deflect the blame. But she had miscalculated yet again. Laura had already warned me to expect a smear campaign, and I was ready. I spent the entire day documenting everything, every call, every message, every attempt she made to discredit me. By the evening, I had compiled enough to further solidify my case. But Sophia wasn't done. At 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached cautiously, peeking through the peephole.